Hey friends, it's Just the Gems, I'm Brandon. I mentioned in a video recently that at one time I thought of handheld games as lesser. Was that short-sighted and ignorant of me? No, I don't think so, because honestly, at one time, handheld games were lesser. Lesser graphics, lesser stories, lesser gameplay. Sorry if that's a hot take, but Oprah told me to speak my truth, so there it is. However, while I think that the handheld games of yesteryear rarely ever cracked the level of good, that's not saying anything about modern handheld games. Developers, and especially JRPG developers, have really done a fantastic job of working within the limitations of these handheld consoles and have delivered some incredible experiences, games I never would have thought possible back in the early 90s. So let's talk about the 10 greatest handheld JRPGs of all time, shall we? And while these are my 10, be sure to let me know what games you'd include down in the comments. Anyway, on to the list. If you were a JRPG lover in the 90s, then you are familiar with the Lufia games. Lufia and the Fortress of Doom and its sequel-prequel Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals were a middle-of-the-road game with great music and a genre-refining masterpiece in that order. And after Lufia 2, the series just kinda dried up. It was so promising too. However, it wasn't truly the end. No, there were a handful of handheld entries, including a Nintendo DS remake of Lufia 2 as an action RPG, a Game Boy Advance game that wasn't very good, and the topic of number 10 on our list, Lufia: The Legend Returns on Game Boy Color. I was a Lufia fan back in the day, and I definitely heard that there was a Lufia on the Game Boy Color. The reasons I didn't play it at the time were A, I wasn't a big handheld gamer like I mentioned before, and B, I didn't own the darn Game Boy Color. It's a shame really because I think I would have enjoyed it quite a bit. Lufia: The Legend Returns is, contrary to what I was assuming, a full-on sequel to the original Lufia. This one takes place 100 years after the end of Lufia, which means 200 years after Lufia 2, because the baddies in the series seem to follow Castlevania Dracula rules and only show up every century. You play as Wayne, spelled W-A-I-N, and I want to say that's probably just a weird mistranslation. Like, is that a legit spelling of the name Wayne? I'm picking nits, I know, but that bothered me right away, and it honestly has just never stopped. I lay awake at night thinking about W-A-I-N Wayne, and I'm losing my mind. If you are a W-A-I-N Wayne, let me know in the comments so that I can finally put this question to bed. Right, but that doesn't matter. We're here to talk about Lufia 3. I'm just gonna call it that going forward. Is that okay? Good. Anyway, he teams up with a woman named Sina to figure out what's going on at the nearby Tower of Death. A piece of architecture that, I don't know, I feel like I probably would have lobbied to have torn down, or at least renamed. But naturally, the goings-on have something to do with the return of the evil Sinistrals. The depth of this game surprised me, particularly because it's a Game Boy game. The combat is fairly unique. You can have up to 9 party members in battle at one time, and they're arranged in 3 rows of 3. The twist is, each turn, only one member from each column can attack. This opens the door for a lot of strategy, and I'm honestly kind of surprised more games didn't attempt something similar. The music's pretty good, considering the hardware, and the graphics are decidedly 8-bit RPG, but still charming in that old school way. If you were a Lufia fan as a kid, but never gave Lufia 3 a chance, I recommend checking it out if you're able. You might be as surprised as I was. The Tales series is one of the longest running JRPG series in the world, and the fact that there are some handheld Tales games should not surprise anyone. What should surprise you though is that some of them are actually great. Case in point is our next game, Tales of Hearts R. This is a PlayStation Vita exclusive in the US, which gives us Vita collectors one more small reason to hold on to our poor, neglected handhelds for a little bit longer. Tales of Hearts R is a remake of a Nintendo DS game that only came out in Japan, and from what I can tell, it's better than its original in basically every way. In Tales of Hearts R, you play as Core Meteor, a kid who is learning the power of Soma from his grandfather. Soma, naturally, are weapons that can fight Zerom. And Zerom, yes, that's right, they're living weapons created by evil dudes from the moon. Look, the worlds of the different Tales games are usually pretty weird. Just roll with it. Soma, Zerom, Spiria, these are all words that start out as complete nonsense to everyone, but by the time the credits roll, you'll be well versed. Point is, Core has the power to defeat the bad guys, and that's reason enough for him to be the hero. He meets Kohaku, a young woman who has her emotions shattered by a Zerom, and since he feels responsible, Core journeys with her to recover the broken pieces and put her together again. Emotionally. Yeah, the story's weird, and it's the only voiced Tales game released in the US without an English dub, but honestly, neither of those things bothered me much. Tales games have odd but fun plots, and Tales of Hearts R is no different. It has the requisite cast of quirky characters and dramatic twists that you've come to expect from the series, and it has a refined version of the action battle system, which this time is called the Aerial Chase Linear Motion Battle System. As the name implies, you'll get to do a lot of air juggling of hapless monsters in this one, and the game allows you to team up with other party members to blast them with combination attacks. I had a lot of fun with this one as I was marathoning my way through the Tales games several years ago. In fact, it really stood out to me as a highlight in the series overall, which is saying something. If you're still living on Vita Island, like me, then you should definitely check it out. Dragon Quest is one of the most famous JRPG series of all time. Created by Yuji Horii with character designs by the late Akira Toriyama, RIP, he was one of the greats. These games have been influencing the genre for as long as the genre has been a thing. In America, we received the first 4 Dragon Quest games on the NES, which is kind of crazy if you consider the market at the time, but we missed out on the 5th entry for the Super Nintendo. That wrong was finally righted when Dragon Quest V for the Nintendo DS hit North America. Dragon Quest V is a generational story that covers the entire life of the nameless hero, who's the son of a deposed king. Throughout the game, you're able to meet, befriend, and marry one of 3 different women, which will influence your eventual children. And the quest continues when those children grow up and the perspective changes to the new, younger hero. It's a really cool concept and one that other games have borrowed since. Other elements of Dragon Quest V have been borrowed as well, like its monster collecting. Sometimes monsters will offer to join your party and you can have them fight alongside you. The number of revolutionary ideas that came out of this game is pretty surprising, especially when you consider we didn't receive it until long after those ideas were no longer considered all that revolutionary. If you haven't experienced the Dragon Quest series, you're really missing out on what I might consider to be a primer for the JRPG genre as a whole. Almost every JRPG that has ever been created was made in a sort of conversation with Dragon Quest. And Dragon Quest V is one of the finest examples of gameplay and story that the series has given us. It's an absolute must-play, so if you're able to stomach the somewhat high aftermarket prices, you should try and pick it up. The Alliance Alive on the Nintendo 3DS comes from Furyu, one of the best JRPG developers if you're looking for games that venture off the beaten path. They're made up of some fantastic talent, and this game in particular was helmed by some huge names. You've got music by Masashi Hamauzu, and the story was written by Yoshitaka Murayama, one of the creators of the Suikoden series, who recently passed away. Dang, that's 2 in a row with a couple of sad, tragic deaths on the development side. I'm sorry guys, I think the rest of the games on this list are fine. Everybody's still alive. But once again, RIP to one of the best. In the world of this game, monsters have taken over and enslaved all the humans. Our 9 main characters come from a variety of backgrounds, and they all come together in an alliance, if you will, in order to fight for humanity's freedom. The art style is super appealing to me, that sort of chibi-fied look with that soft, sort of watercolory aesthetic. The music is great too, as you'd expect with Hamauzu behind it. And the story is moving and takes you on a pretty wild ride from start to finish. The battle system takes a bit of getting used to, unless you're a super fan of games like the Saga series. See, in Alliance Alive, you don't gain levels in the traditional way of most JRPGs. Instead, your abilities randomly increase as you participate in battles. You also earn talent points that you can assign to various attributes in between battles. It employs a grid system for positioning your characters, and as you'd expect, how you place your characters makes a big difference in how battles play out. Given its setup, the Alliance Alive is a pretty strange one, but it's extremely compelling, and considering that an HD remaster was released on modern consoles, it should be a no-brainer that you need to give this one a shot. Another 3DS game with a surprising amount of production value behind it, Monster Hunter Stories takes the world of Monster Hunter and asks, what if monsters were our friends? I mean, you still do quite a bit of monster killing, all things considered, but it's not all you do. And so from PETA's perspective, it's a step in the right direction. In Monster Hunter Stories, you are a young voiceless rider, which means that you are able to steal monster eggs and raise and train various monsters, which the game refers to as monsties, which only sort of makes me want to claw out my eardrums. Combat here is turn-based, and you and your Monstie. Each get a chance to whack an enemy. The game uses a sort of rock, paper, scissors mechanic when pitting two characters against each other. If your character and a monster are attacking each other at the same time, both will rush at one another, and this rock, paper, scissors, actually it's power, technical, and speed. But regardless, that determines who's successful. The world is beautiful and colorful, and even though it's not open exactly, it feels super expansive, especially for a 3DS game. Riding around on the back of your Monstie, starting to feel more natural to say that now. I don't like what I'm becoming. But yeah, riding around is a blast, and it's fun to sneak into monster dens and steal an egg right out of their nest. I mean, it's not a nice thing to do, but people in the game just don't really question it. So I guess I won't either. In any case, this is another formerly handheld-only game that's getting ported over to more modern consoles, so give this one a shot as soon as you're able. Many people have bemoaned Final Fantasy's move away from turn-based combat and some of the other traditions that made the series what it was. While I'm perfectly fine with a more action-oriented Final Fantasy future, I can sympathize with people who just prefer the old style. Fortunately, Square Enix hasn't forgotten the old ways, and they've kept the flame burning with some of their other series. And the series that started this new rendition of the old style is Bravely Default, with the first game hitting 3DS back in 2012. In fact, Square Enix really wanted fans to know that this was a play on the classic Final Fantasy formula, because they subtitled it Flying Fairy, as in FF. I know, it sounds like a stretch over here, but I'm guessing in Japan, that made a lot of people happy. So yes, Bravely Default keeps the old traditions alive. It's got turn-based combat and the classic Final Fantasy job system in place. As for innovations, it uses the Brave and Default systems to make combat much more engaging. Characters can choose to default on a turn, which is basically just a defensive stance, and build up points that can be spent later. These points, called Brave Points, can then be spent to increase the number of turns a character can take in a row up to 4. As an added element of strategy, you can actually go into the negatives on Brave Points, meaning you can take 4 turns even if you don't have 4 Brave Points saved up. However, that means you'll have to skip your next several turns until your Brave Points naturally get restored to 0. The story centers around the darkening of the crystals. Yeah, yet another Final Fantasy reference. And a group of characters come together to set things right. You've got Agnes, the Vestal of the Wind Crystal. You've got Ringabel, an amnesiac who finds himself in possession of a journal that seems to know the future. You've got Adia, a soldier with the enemy army. And finally, you've got your protagonist, Tiz, a country bumpkin who had to watch his whole village get completely obliterated. The plot is surprisingly packed with twists that I genuinely didn't see coming, and it remains engaging up until the end. Well, almost. A lot of people have a problem with the end game as it requires visiting the same locations multiple times in a row, but I think even with that bit of a drag on the pacing at the very end, this game still stands up as one of the best examples of a JRPG on a handheld system. It's kind of baffling that this one hasn't been remade for the Switch, along with its direct sequel, Bravely Second. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that happens someday soon. Crisis Core was my first trip back to the world of Final Fantasy VII years and years after I'd first played that original game, and I was not prepared for the emotional journey it was going to take me on. The protagonist, Zack Fair, has very little screen time in the OG Final Fantasy VII, but his importance to the story can't be overstated, and finally getting to see his history played out was incredibly cool. Not to mention, this was a Square Enix PSP title, which meant the highest production values. This felt like playing a PS2 game on the go, and that feeling still hadn't gotten old yet. Turn-based combat is switched out for action with the strange addition of a slot machine reel that's constantly spinning. As the story progresses and Zack encounters more characters, more faces are added to the spinning slots. When a match occurs, Zack's able to do a special move or limit break, and he increases his level and magic strength with the same system. Like I said, it's strange, but the developers found a way to sort of work it into the story. I think it's supposed to represent what Zack is thinking about at any given moment during a battle, and when he has a particularly strong memory, sometimes the battle's even interrupted by a brief flashback of that particular character on his mind. Honestly though, even though I did have fun with the combat, I was mostly there for the story. I knew how everything would end, but I still got completely caught up in all the drama unfolding, and the ending hit me way harder than I ever could have imagined. If you like Final Fantasy VII and haven't played this game, do yourself a favor and grab the remaster. It's available on basically everything, and it's so worth it. What we have here was the reason to own a Vita. Even if you aren't interested in everything else the Vita has to offer, for a long time this was the only way to play this masterpiece. Persona 4 Golden is the typical Atlas re-release of a Persona game with added content, and it really perfected the Persona formula. It's super stylish and fast-paced, the story is long and compelling, and the characters are so engaging and fun. The Persona games, from 3 onward at least, are a combination of life sim and dungeon crawler, and the way these two disparate gameplay styles mesh together is what makes this series great. During the day, your silent protagonist goes to school, hangs out with friends, goes shopping, and just does regular teenager stuff. But at night, he and his friends have to work to untangle a mystery surrounding a bunch of killings happening in their small town. They do this by jumping inside of the television, and yeah, this is another game with a completely out there premise. Par for the course as far as Persona is concerned though. Every character in your party can summon a persona, which is a manifestation of their inner self. In practice, all their special attacks and magic spells come from their personas. The main character is a bit different in that he's able to hold multiple personas within himself. This means you can gain new personas, fuse them together to create even more powerful personas, and customize yourself to your heart's content. You'll come for the teen drama and murder mystery, and you'll stay for the compelling gameplay. This game has finally escaped Vita Island and can be played on most modern consoles, so jump on it. I've talked about Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology before. Shoot. It's becoming this year's Crystar, isn't it? Probably need to dial it down a bit from now on. But anyway, it's a pretty remarkable achievement for handheld role-playing games. Radiant Historia is the story of Stock, a stoic secret agent for the Kingdom of Alistel who ends up being given a book that lets him go back and rewrite history, which is probably a good thing to have. I mean, I wouldn't mind having one myself. But in Stock's case, his entire world is slowly turning to sand, so, you know, he's facing actual stakes. I'm facing the regret of saying "you too" when the waiter told me to enjoy my food. The last time I talked about this game, I focused on the story, which made sense because it was a video about the best stories. If you want to know more about that, go give that 10 best stories video a watch. But this time, I want to talk about the gameplay. And like the story, it's another place where this game just really does something uniquely its own. Your enemies end up placed on a 3x3 grid. You gain special abilities that allow you to attack and move the enemies around. One attack might knock an enemy to the left, another might knock an enemy back. When you push an enemy like this, they move in that direction until they hit the edge of the screen or another enemy. If they hit another enemy, those enemies are then stacked on top of each other for the remainder of that turn. By strategically moving enemies around the battle screen, you can stack them together, which also increases your damage. You also have complete freedom to redo the turn order of your party members, so strategizing the best method of getting the enemies in one place and wailing on them is not only possible, but incredibly necessary. As much as I enjoy the battle system, I will say that I'm glad they included an easy mode of sorts, which basically removes the need to battle much at all. If you're not loving the system, but you are loving the story, then the developers still want you to keep playing. And I think that's one of the best and most player-friendly things a developer can do. Look, this has the requisite timey-wimey plot and complex characters that I expect from a game that I would choose to rank this high on a list like this. And it has gameplay to match. Honestly, the fact that this game is still a 3DS exclusive when you can't even buy it anymore thanks to the eShop closures, I mean, it's a low-key tragedy. I hope someone over at Atlas sees this and makes a note that people definitely still want to see this game released on modern platforms. It absolutely deserves it. Yes, this is cheating, and no, I don't care. Chrono Trigger is my favorite game, and the fact that there exists a portable port of this game on the Nintendo DS means it places #1. Chrono Trigger was a classic of the Super Nintendo era, the capper on a generation that brought so many revolutionary changes to the genre, but one that shone because of what it refined, not what it invented. It's the story of a silent boy named Chrono and his friends who end up stranded in the past, and then the future, and then all across time as they slowly begin to uncover the horrible fate that awaits the planet. It had character designs by Akira Toriyama with music by my favorite composer Yasunori Mitsuda, and planning and direction from the fathers of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, Hironobu Sakaguchi and Yuji Horii. It's not surprising that the game was successful, given its pedigree. What is surprising, however, is its staying power. With its beautiful music and charming characters, I mean, it's just an absolute joy to play. It doesn't hurt that the graphical stylings of this game have stood the test of time so well. We didn't realize back then that we were about to enter into the era of polygonal hell, an era that's beginning to see its own sort of resurgence of nostalgia, which I find myself getting charmed by, if I'm honest. No, back then, this was just more of what we were used to, but better. The gameplay was also familiar. It uses a modified version of the active time battle system from the Final Fantasy series, but it was expanded to allow the use of combination attacks in which 2 or 3 party members could join together and unleash completely unique special moves. Not only that, but for the first time, battles took place directly on the screen where the rest of the action occurred. This meant that there were no random battles. In a sense, every single battle was specifically curated for each situation, and each had to be meticulously planned to ensure it worked. I can't imagine how much work that must have been for the designers, but the result is one of the best battle experiences in JRPGs ever. Chrono Trigger is still talked about as the best, or at least one of the best JRPGs of all time. It frequently tops lists just like this one. And again, I would argue that it's not because it created some brand new gameplay mechanic or revolutionized the way stories and games are told. No, what it did was look at the canvas of role-playing games in the 90s, everything that had come before it, and said, this, but perfect. It's the epitome of 90s era JRPG game design and aesthetics, and its DS release is the definitive version with new content. It was everything I wanted it to be and more. That's why it's my favorite handheld JRPG of all time. Anyway, that's it. What do you think of my list? Got some handheld JRPGs I missed? Let me know down in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching and subscribing. It means so much to me. Until next time. Bye.